Welcome to Upfront, a new show in partnership between Shaw TV and the Saskatoon StarPhoenix. In this half hour, we'll go beyond the headlines to answer your questions about important issues affecting our city and province. I'm your host, Simon Hyatt. During each episode, we'll welcome in journalists from the StarPhoenix who cover these topics. And for our first show, we're taking a look at the far-reaching implications of the recent provincial budget, both here in the city and across Saskatchewan. I'm happy to welcome in Phil Tank, who covers City Hall for the StarPhoenix. Also joining us is Jordan Cooper, a local writer and political commentator. He has written a weekly column for the StarPhoenix for the past 6 years. Gentlemen, welcome. Thank you for joining us for our first episode of Upfront.
Thanks for having us.
All right, so as we're talking about the budget, we'll get into specific issues, different sectors that have been affected as we move along. But just in general terms, back in late March, Premier Bradwell posted a video saying this wasn't going to be a popular budget, and I guess that's probably a bit of an understatement. For you personally, professionally, were you surprised at just how deep this budget cut? I'll throw it open to both of you.
Well, it's definitely a change for this government, which has had a fairly smooth rot. I mean, I think we knew that it wasn't sustainable. We saw big deficits in the two budgets before this one. And so I think we knew that we certainly got warning that everything was on the table. I think the way they went about it, you know, the cutting the libraries and cuts to municipalities, which I think we probably knew that some sort of cut to municipalities was coming. But to go to the grants in lieu program where they cut, I don't want to say it was, I think it was seen as, it was really unexpected. And it's sort of, in a way for the provincial government, it's kept the story alive a lot longer and more people talking about it. And maybe they're thinking, well, so few people are going to understand what grants in lieu are, that it's better to cut there than to simply cut revenue sharing, and we could say, hey, we're still revenue sharing, but we're not paying this money. So it's clearly thrown lots of municipalities for a loop. It threw libraries for a loop before they backed down on those cuts, and been a lot of continuing reaction. Last night a city council committee is struggling with the 2018 budget as affected by the provincial budget. So it's something we're going to be feeling for a while.
And that relationship with the city, Jordan, obviously something that's been greatly impacted. There were initially talks about maybe a lawsuit happening. Of course, Phil, you wrote about after the mayor's State of the City address, the fact that Mayor Clark believes this is a relationship that can sustain and still be a positive one. But where has this left the city of Saskatoon, City Council, and of course Mayor Clark fairly early in his term?
Well, I saw it coming. I knew that there'd be cuts to municipalities well before even Clark was elected. But I think blindsiding another level of government. And I know there's that perception that it's a junior level of government, but it's still a partner that you need to work with, and also the economic driver of your province. A lot of the money that goes back to the provincial coffers is generated in this urban area. So to just blindside them and not give them the heads up that what was coming to allow them to prepare, I thought, really strained that relationship, and nobody wants to see that. Wall could have telegraphed it in different ways, let them know, give them the ideas, and then also the grant in lieu program, which is really just payment for services. It's not so much a grant. They pay us to provide city services for important crown corporations. There's no expectation that was going to be touched. So I think that caught a lot of people off guard.
So where does this relationship go from here then, do you think? Is this something that, as Mayor Clark indicated in that State of the City address, that he still can believe a positive one, or do you feel like this has maybe done some lasting damage?
Well, Charlie Clark's background is as a mediator,
right.
So if anyone can salvage a relationship, it should be him. And it's an interesting contrast because Don Acheson took a lot of pride and some criticism in maintaining good relationships with whoever was in Ottawa and whoever was in power in Saskatchewan. Like I say, he was praised for, or he thought that was the right way to go. Some people criticized him as, oh, you're not critical enough about this. So it's definitely, there's a definite change in mayor, right? There's a different person there. you know, the province may feel, because Charlie Clark is seen as center left and Don Acheson was seen as center right, that this is an easier. But you know, don't forget, it's not just Saskatoon. It's Regina, it's Melfort, it's PA, it's all sorts of municipalities that have been affected by this.
And of course, all of this ties into, by and large, the drop in resource prices, the effect that had on the province in terms of revenue from resources. And I think one of the big criticisms of the provincial government was not anticipating that possible drop and continuing to spend with envisioning those resource levels at such a high level. And so I guess the question is this something that the government should have planned better for?
I don't know. I follow the commodity prices fairly closely, and even yesterday I found probably 4 or 5 different predictions of what's going to happen with the Saudi oil, with OPEC cutting back production. It's hard, but at the same time, I think you also, as a provincial government, you also have to realize that commodity-based economies are often have external factors that cause wild fluctuations.
Sure.
And, so there's probably, the lack of planning, which is we got rid of, kind of our income stabilization fund, or that was spent, and then the spending kept going with the hope that the prices would come back up. And eventually, I think, there's this realization that it's not, and that we need to actually prepare for a much different oil type environment.
Of course, the government, though, did undertake some pretty major expenditures when we're looking at things like the football stadium in Regina, Children's Hospital. Of course, the merits or negatives of those things could be their own separate show. These are significant projects, though. Do you think this is giving them any sober second thought about spending these large amounts of dollars on these giant projects?
Well, I guess it's a little late for regret there.
Sure.
And I think governments tend to view capital projects a little bit differently than they view their operational budgets, because the football stadium is a big expense, obviously, and then when those decisions were made, Saskatchewan was booming, and it was far more easy to get that past people than it would be right now. And same probably with the Children's Hospital. In Saskatoon, we're building a new art gallery, building 2 new bridges. There's a lot going on. Some of it was absolutely necessary, like some of it, some of the bridge works. And of course, you have money in there from the federal government and the city and the province. Whether the province, it's always easy to look back and say, we're in a tough economic time now. We should have or should not have done this.
Absolutely. Well, let's get into some of the specific items within the budget itself. One of the first ones I want to talk about, the PST increase and the effect that this is going to have in your mind, both on consumers and, of course, on businesses, because it does have a direct impact on both.
A lot of economists, though, will make the argument, and I'm not an economist, but I will make this argument, that the PST cut or an increase that we saw do not have a huge impact on spending decisions. It's 1%. On things I know the fixed price on with the tax, I find it a little bit annoying, but I still have to go buy my milk, or I still have to go buy my things. If it was jumping up a couple percent or 3%, then you'd start seeing an impact on consumer spending, I believe. But what I've read is that it really impacts things for about 3 months, and we're talking about both cuts and increases, where we might spend a little bit more with the cut or spend a little bit less, and then it will even out. So it is a consumption task. We are going to keep going with it. What I question is that we raise it, and then we give a corporate tax cut.
Right.
Which it awfully feels like that a lot of these cuts that we've taken or increases in the tax is going to now subsidize corporations in Saskatchewan. And part of us are really going, why was that done now?
And of course, what a lot of people have said is giving that break to corporations, as you say. Now, the people that are going to be suffering as a result are lower income people in the province who might be the ones who would really feel the effect of something like a 1% tax increase, especially when it's going to be applied on different items.
The fact that we took away funerals for people on social assistances, those kind of cuts. There's a part of it that goes, and we gave those kind of spending cuts, which are very, very little. And that's been a lot of what has been written about, that these small, little, almost incidental, feels like ideological cuts, are coming at the at the same time. Then we're also giving corporate money, and we're like, and the talking points has been, well, we had no other choice. Well, clearly the government did have another choice. They just decided to go down this road of both fairly cruel cuts, but then also the corporate tax cuts, and I think that gets lost a lot in the provincial budget.
There's two things to think about with the PST. Is one, that it's risen 1%, and they've expanded the number of areas where it applies in. And just looking at the city's budget, I think that was one of the things that's maybe gone under the radar a bit. They said this is going to leave us, I think it was $6 to $7 million short on our capital budget. But about a month ago, they were still trying to figure out how the PST was. It's complicated. It's when you expand the number of areas it's being applied in and raise it a bit. That's complicated. So that may be another thing that we'll see coming down the road. And it also had an impact on the city's operating budget because, of course, they spend money in this city and that sort of thing.
And that's something that's sort of interesting. You think of PST as being something that affects you at the consumer level, but you're absolutely right. This does affect the city because they have to buy stuff too. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about the impact on libraries in the province. You touched on this a little bit earlier. This was one of the more interesting issues that came out of it because, of course, we had the initial cut and then we had it restored. Just the roller coaster ride that the libraries in the province went on.
Well, I mean, the Wall government would say, and I think they did say, we're the government that admits when we make mistakes and corrects them. The flip side of that is, that maybe you made a move that you didn't research properly, mm-hmm. right? That you didn't quite anticipate what something that is, a community building block, I think, is what libraries are, and cutting to them and kind of cutting out of the blue too. It's a little like the Grand Saint Louis. I don't think a lot of people thought, they're going to go after libraries, and their defense was really clumsy, like, we have too many libraries in the province. And again in Saskatoon particularly, the library is very popular. I think they added like 12,000 new library cards last year, and it's an area that's always been a strength for Saskatoon. So again, that was something that was going to hit this city fairly hard, and walking it back, I guess, was the good thing. They clearly saw that people were very upset about it, but maybe should have been thought through a little bit better in the first place.
And maybe in some ways this is another symptom of what we were talking about a few minutes ago. Maybe libraries are something that provide more of a benefit to people who have lower income in the province. They have internet access, they have access to free materials, and as you say, not taking that into account might be another symptom of that lack of foresight, especially for people who have less money in the province.
I think Phil was totally correct, though. It didn't seem to be well researched or understood that, of course, libraries being an employment hub as well, not just a community, and the fact that is how so many people access jobs or, look for employment opportunities or access even government services. So the loss of those was actually terrifying for a lot of communities because that was their connection back to the greater world. And, and so to go back to that, it seemed like when it came out, along with the connection again with STC providing some of the interprovincial loan transfers, it seemed to be somebody didn't totally understand what was going on with this greater interconnected system, and then finally they did have to walk them back. But you're right, it is an issue that is much bigger to lower income than it is maybe to those that are in power right now.
Lots of elements of our society affected, of course, by the recent provincial budget. We'll get into some more of those coming up after the break. But a big part of our new show here up front is we also want to interact with you. Don't forget, you can get a hold of us through Facebook at Shaw TV Saskatoon, and of course, the StarPhoenix at Shaw TV Saskatoon and at the StarPhoenix on Twitter. And please feel free to email us at shawtv10@shaw.ca. We'll be back with more in just a couple of minutes with Phil Tank and Jordan Cooper.
Ever watch TV and said to yourself, I could do that? Well, you can. As part of its community access programming, Shaw TV is looking for volunteer-run, community-produced short segments and shows. Create your own program, your ideas, your vision, on television. Bring us your proposal, sell us on it, and we'll train you and your crew, providing the professional equipment you need to make your ideas reality for free. Everyone is welcome. Get involved in making your own community program. See where it takes you.
Welcome back to Upfront. I'm Simon Hyatt, joined by Jordan Cooper and Phil Tank from the Saskatoon StarPhoenix, talking all about the recent provincial budget. One of the landmark institutions in the province that was obviously greatly affected by the recent budget, STC, the bus service in the province, completely eliminated, which of course affects people right across the province, also eliminates several hundred jobs. Your initial reaction to that when that was on the chopping block?
Well, I guess it was another bit of a surprise. I mean, I think, STC has obviously struggled for years,
sure,
but again, it's one of those kind of lifeline sort of things. It's not, it was there sort of as a, something the government did, which the private sector wasn't willing to do. Now, I guess we'll see what will spring up in its place. But again, I don't think, in the long run, if you look at, the history of STC, I don't think it was that surprising that at some point a government said, we can't keep funding this. But on the other hand, again, it was, I don't think a lot of people, before the budget thought, okay, we're going to eliminate this entirely.
And I know we've seen already a new service springing up, as you mentioned, things maybe filling in to take its place. I believe a shuttle service from Martinsville to Saskatoon to maybe fill in one of those gaps. But obviously, there are several other gaps that are left in that wake. I don't know if either of you are you privy to any information about other movements that have been undertaken to maybe fill in those gaps, because as we've heard the stories, it's a lot of people who need to get to Regina to get medical treatment, that sort of thing. As well, it's parcel delivery in the province. Any information that you've heard about this?
Well, it's kind of going in a little bit in two directions. I believe it's Tiger Courier that is starting to take over some of the parcel, some of the limousine at Regina, trying to take over the viable routes. I would have liked to have seen the STC privatized.
Okay,
and,
sure.
I know it comes down to we're shutting it down, we're not privatizing it, but in a very orderly, here's a selling off some of the routes. And then in some way trying to keep as much of that intact. Sure, the government throws a lot of money into that every year. And I guess maybe what I should say, I would have preferred maybe they would have kept going with it, but if they could not afford to keep going with it, then I think an orderly privatization, other than we're shutting it down at the end of May,
right,
was much better. We could have got probably a better value for kind of the shareholders as a province of Saskatchewan. I think we also, as people stakeholders who use it as well, I think they would have been better served with a much more orderly transition than what we saw right now.
And I believe, was there not just a big purchase order placed for several new buses that, of course, now the province has to figure out what to deal with?
Yeah, there was some investment. It was kind of, again, it's kind of like this budget just kind of happened. It didn't seem to be orderly. Right. There didn't seem to be any process to it. Everybody was blindsided. Things didn't seem to go across. Like some of those cuts just really defy logic as why you would cut them. And this just seemed to be one more of them.
We talked a little bit in the first segment about the impact on funeral services, specifically funeral services for people who rely on social services, something that the government had previously covered and no longer will. Talk about that in terms of your reaction to that and the impact that it will have on people who are on social services.
Well, yeah, that's an obviously sad one. It's one of those ones that makes the government look like it doesn't care, or that it doesn't care about certain sectors of people. So kind of an odd choice, given how I don't know exactly the amount of money they're saving there, but it's not as substantial. It's one of those little things that you wonder why that was chosen.
Yeah, and that's another interesting thing. You bring up a good point. It's not one that would seem on the surface that it would save a ton of money, but I guess the government is just in a situation where they feel that anywhere they can trim what they perceive as fat, they feel they have to do it.
And it's tough. It's tough up against corporate tax breaks and tax breaks
right,
for more wealthy people. There you see a real contrast in if you're a critic of the government. Wow, look what they did on this side, and then look what they did on the other side.
Education, of course, something greatly funded by this budget. There had been some talk of amalgamation of school boards. That's something that didn't actually come out of this budget, but there was significant cut for pre-kindergarten to grade 12 education, receiving $22 million less. That's also probably a bit of a tough one for a lot of people to swallow, because when you're talking about education, that is quite literally the future of our province, preparing these young people for the world.
I don't know of a single jurisdiction anywhere, and I went looking, that cut education and found a path to prosperity.
Right.
You know, right now you're cutting the development of children. They're going to become entrepreneurs, business leaders, community leaders, politicians. Going to be have a tremendous impact on who, you know, this province will be decades down the line. And we've decided to cut them, and really in the end of the way, leave them less equipped to lead us. And jurisdictions that have found their way out of tough times, the first place they started to reinvest was back in education. And so we've done the exact opposite, and I think it's going to have, especially if these continue and that funding isn't restored, I think we're going to see long-term economic damage. The problem is it's not as immediate or perceivable right away, and that's why governments get away with it.
Yeah, and I agree. It seems like a short fix, you know, for a government that likes to constantly point out how many more people are coming to the province since they've been elected and how many people were leaving before 2007. You know, that seems like a cut that's going to have people say, well, you know, if education is not going to be good here, is this where I want to raise a family? Yeah, so it's one of those things.
And those students that are graduating from high school, looking at post-secondary education, those institutions also affected. 5% cut, $30 million less. Also, student aid greatly reduced for university students. University of Saskatchewan, University of Regina, of course, any post-secondary institution across the province. We heard from President Stoichev. This is something that's going to have a significant impact as well.
Yes, and there's you know, they started mailing out property tax notices this week, and in there is the biggest education property tax increase, you know, in 10 years, and it's really going to shock people who might have thought, oh well, look, the city of Saskatoon managed well, they didn't destroy us with a property tax increase even after the provincial budget, but when they get that, they're going to say, oh, wow, look how much more, you know, and the city has taken steps to show here's what you're paying for municipal services, here's how much more the province is charging you for education. So it's, you know, it's tough to take in two ways, in that in a way we're paying more for education this year. I think it's going to be, that portion of the property tax is going up 7%. So we're paying more for that, and we're getting less because of the cut from it.
That's a bit of a tough one to swallow, as we're trying, of course. It's a constant battle trying to keep young people in Saskatchewan, and when maybe the inevitable income is that tuition rates go up as a result of this, that becomes a tougher and tougher battle.
Well, I saw it in my household firsthand when my son went in and, you know, sent away, you know, instead of staying in Saskatchewan, now sent away for catalogs and brochures from universities outside the province. And I was like, well, that's part of the impact. You know, instead of staying at home, we're going to start looking for better options outside.
Another really significant impact in the province, and specifically in Saskatoon, the Meewasin Valley Authority. Provincial funding is going to be cut about in half, receiving about $400,000 less. This is something that is significant, I think, to everyone in Saskatoon, because we all love that river area. I mean, it's kind of the signature area of our city, and that's what the MVA is responsible for. We've already seen some impact on the MVA in terms of how they're responding to this. Your thoughts, Phil, on the MVA and what they're going to be facing?
Well, you know, you're right. It is a very popular agency in the city. I think people might not even know who funds it, or, you know, how it operates, but they sort of know what the MVA touches in the city, and that they take care of the trails and that sort of thing. And it's definitely been a rough ride for them. I mean, not only the provincial budget cuts, but when they cut down a bunch of trees along Spadina, people reacted, and they just fired their CEO last week. So it's a rough ride for something that's really cherished. And I don't think it's overstating it to say that, you know, no one really knows what the future of the Meewasin Valley Authority is going to be. You know, how much can it? You know, it was considered to be underfunded, like, you know, funding had stayed at certain levels, but it didn't keep up with inflation as it was. So I think, you know, that's something there's still a lot of question about, like, you know, what is the future of the MVA? They have an interim board chairman of the board right now. They're looking for, they're going to have an interim CEO and then look for a permanent CEO. So yeah, it's one of the things that I think hit Saskatoon in a way that it didn't hit other cities. Oh, I will say that you know, urban, as the province calls them, urban parks in other cities got cut in the last round of budget. So I think it's something that other people have felt prior to this budget.
Absolutely. There are many smaller things that were affected in this budget. Jordan, you wrote a very interesting column, I thought, on one of those things that maybe gets less attention, sort of falls by the wayside. That's the chaplains in the hospital. I enjoyed what we wrote about that. That's certainly something that's probably not going to get a ton of attention when we're dealing with these bigger issues, but this is also something that's kind of significant and maybe symbolic of some of the shortcomings of this budget.
Yeah, that was such an odd cut for me. Because it showed just, again, this really lack of understanding of how the healthcare process works. During the question period, they got up and they said, the Saskatchewan Party said, well, we don't believe in prayer, we don't think we should fund prayer in hospitals. That's not what those chaplains do. They are specifically trained and educated for a lot of study on, basically there to listen, to help, to advocate. They are there when people don't know where else to turn. Mm-hmm. I've seen that firsthand where you're caught with overwhelming news. You may not have a lot of family in the city. It's a chaplain that's there to help walk you through the process to become this objective listening. And it's also to help people, again, along with the funerals, in their last moments, to make sure that they're not alone. And this idea that they're there to somehow lead some prayers was kind of insulting to what they do, but also now that we've lost them, now who does that job?
Right.
Highly paid nurses or doctors, or people just left? What is going to go? And that's a big gap that was filled by the chaplains and is gone now.
Gentlemen, we're running a little bit short on time, but as we look to the future, at least politically, maybe one thing the Sask Party has working for it is there won't be another provincial election until 2020. So the question then becomes, can they recover from this, or is this something that they're going to be paying for into the future and into that next election?
I guess there's a few different ways to look at probably two different ways to look at the last few elections here. Is that Broadwell was so popular, it didn't matter who the NDP put up against him, or that the last two NDP leaders, Cam Broten and Dwayne Lingenfelter, failed to excite everybody. So a lot of it depends on who they put in charge of the NDP. Everyone's speculating it's going to be Ryan Miley. Governments into their third term always are starting to wear out their welcome. There's, I can't think of a lot of premiers who've lasted as long, who've lasted past 3 terms. I think this budget sort of could spell, might get the Sask Party saying, as good as Brad Wall has, a lot of people are going to connect him with, probably another tough budget next year too. So.
Absolutely. Gentlemen, thank you so much. It was a quick half hour. We do have to wrap things up. Thank you very much for joining us for our first episode of Upfront. Once again, Phil Tank, Jordan Cooper, we really appreciate your contributions.
Thanks for having us.
And thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Upfront.